Hey, it's Stu, and I have made a series of shorts of the books that I've read in the last week or so with the 52 Book Club's 2026 reading challenge in mind. But now I'm just going to do a reading wrap up and talk about the books really generally. I'm not going to give much of a synopsis, but I am going to say what I liked or didn't like. In my shorts, I was really just trying to say what kind of book I think, what kind of reader the book that I read, because there's a lot of range in this reading pile. And then in this, I might be just a little bit more critical because I do read critically, and I do like to listen to book reviewers who tell me their honest opinions. So I probably just not do much of a synopsis because those are easy to find, but just kind of let you know what worked or what didn't work or what stood out in my reading of the book. So sort of the first book that I read in this sort of reading series was Slewfoot by Brom. And this had been on hold for a long time. I had found it in a little free library, and I decided that due to the kind of the smallness of the font, I wanted to have a digital copy as well. But I am very glad that I also had the physical copy. The placement of the artwork and just kind of the layout of the physical book was a little bit different than the digital book. So I liked having the digital to go to when my eyes got tired, but I really liked having this physical book. And I can commend Brom's artwork here and just helping bring out this sort of like remnant of Pan's Labyrinth type vibe of these creatures. Someone who was reviewing this book called it feminist. I suppose it depends on how you define feminism. If you define feminism that the torture and mistreatment and disenfranchisement of women happened and shouldn't have, then sure. I myself didn't necessarily find it a wholly feminist work, other than there is some feminine rage. And I think that most people who read and like this book know what that is and why that happens. And I appreciate the male author's attempt who is Brom, to bring us a story that identifies that religion as an institution and as a founding institution this is not a criticism of an overall criticism of religion, but this is a criticism of actions and things that the institution of religion has done, which is franchised, promoted, enabled the torture of women. There are scenes of torture in here, and I would definitely then say, watch out for your content warnings, because there's some content in here. And Brom's not just making things up. Of course, he's looking at moments in our history, like our history. By that, I mean, I live in the United States of the Salem witch trials. And the United States was not the only place in the world that persecuted witches. So I think it was an interesting look at institutions, founding institutions, and the mechanisms that they used to gain power through the removal of autonomy and the torture of women. I liked the building of the atmosphere. I thought that Brom did a good job with that. There was some gaze that I suspected, even from the picture in the front, that I kind of thought I could have had done a little bit done without. But overall, I think this book worked, especially for its audience. And I'm glad that I read it. I don't know if I'll pick up other Broms, but maybe if I should happen to find them. A book that I was listening to at about the same time while I was riding buses and taking my walks and doing my chores and all the things we do, us audiobook and listeners, was The Village Library's Demon Hunting Society by C.M. Wagner. And this was it was a cozy. It was definitely a cozy. And I think because of the darkness of Slewfoot, it's dark fantasy. I appreciated having a nice cozy fantasy to go along with it. I also really always appreciate characters who are in their late middle ages or those later decades, 60s, 70s, and 80s of life. And our protagonist in this book I love libraries as settings, and our protagonist is her name's Sherry Pinker. Anyway, she's a librarian, and I mean, for the sleuth, the detective sleuth, could we not have a more endearing character than a librarian? Okay. Yes, of course. I think because of my endearment for cozies that are written to be cozy, that are actually written to be cozy, I suspend a lot of disbelief, and I also like my the things that would distract me because I would be critical of them, like I can turn that down a little. And I feel like that about this book. I wonder, did the fantastical elements add to this story? Yes, they did. They made it unique in its way. But I also like it's really calling to attention for me that maybe fantasy, I know this, but I don't like fantasy as much as other genres. I thought this was, again, cozy. It was humorous in ways that worked. I did chuckle out loud. And if I run into, I think there's a sequel to this, and if I should happen to run into it, I would definitely grab it. Folks who like reading about books, reading out libraries, liking mysteries, or would like just to like a little bit of a creative blend of a cozy fantasy and or older protagonists. That's who I would say this book is for. By the time I got to Leila Lalami's The Dream Hotel, I kind of needed it. I needed a good book, and I did. I anticipated liking this book because I liked The Secret Sun, and so I knew that I liked Leila Lalami's prose and the way that she brings stories. Now, The Secret Sun is not speculative, and this is. So I thought, will this work or will this not work? I've heard a lot of praise for this book, but I've also heard a few people criticize it for reasons that made me wonder, did they understand the book, at least the way that I did? And I guess that's a great thing about reading. I had an experience. So in this book, the main character is detained while coming back from a conference abroad, and she works as a professor or teacher, and she's detained because there's an algorithm that's in place. It's got bipartisan support in the U.S. That if this algorithm says that you have the potential to commit a crime, then you're detained in something that they keep calling a hotel, which is a word that they used, I believe, for sanitariums. I think that's actually deliberately picked. A hotel, but not a prison or jail, but they are, in fact, it's a euphemism, if not just a straight up gaslighting. They're not free to leave. They are in detention. They're not free to act any way that they want. And in fact, they're arbitrarily given points and given privileges or not. And it was really just completely an arbitrary system. There's also this other company that handles the communications, which is very true of our jail system, that like to call out or to email out, and the commissary, you have to put money in. So there's all of this mechanisms of capitalistic money-making machines. And one of the scenes in here, she keeps only getting a bot when she's like, but my call got dropped and you took all the credits for the entire call, but I didn't get to talk for more than like 30 seconds. And And then she just gets like bot responses and bot responses. She never actually gets to talk with a human. I had a very similar situation in my life recently, and it was so triggering because I think we set up these systems where automatic things such as AI are meant to just let people know, like, you know, you have a library book overdue, you didn't do this or that, and the truth is there fail. There's human error, and in the case of what happened with me, there was human error. Somebody didn't do what they're supposed to do, so the bot took over, sent me, I wouldn't say a nasty message, but a message that I didn't appreciate, and there wasn't any, like, it wasn't from a human to which I could say, oh, I'm so sorry, this is what actually happened. I had to go out of my way to find a human, an actual human to talk to. And it was really reminiscent, like, of what was happening in this book, only this woman, the protagonist, is under so much more stress because she is held against her will, and she has 2 small children who she can't wait to get back to. So absolutely, this is looking at all of the consequences of a prison complex, right? Of a prison industrial complex, which already exists. It's like, it's speculative but thinly veiled. And it's not even like, what if we get to this point? We're already at this point: family separation, capitalistic gain for people who are held in these detention centers, giving them more incentive to keep holding them, etc. The only criticism I have about this book is I don't like the way it ended. I thought the ending was quite disappointing, actually. But of course, you'll have to read it to get there, because I don't want to talk about what about the ending without spoiling the ending. But overall, again, The Dream Hotel was a great book for me. This is a signed copy, so I get to think a little bit about where or whom I want this book to go to. But, you know, if I were just cruising into a little free library and I found a signed copy of a pretty hyped up book, I might be happy. So it might just go to little free libraries. The next book that I read, I got at a thrift store, and I was so happy to find it because it was a book that I knew that I really wanted to read. And the fact that it came up on the reading list that I had set up for this last week or so, made me so happy. And that's The Girl with a Louding Voice by Abi Daré. And I think this book is from 2020. Yeah, book of the month. All you have to do is look. And of course, it was hyped enough to be a book of the month. And yeah, I feel like this is a hyped book. And although I'm usually like almost anti-hype, sometimes to just even spite myself, I thought this book deserved all of the hype. It felt so authentic, and where I do have places, again, I could criticize parts of this book. I also feel like, as the reader of this particular book, who am I to wage those criticisms other than just of how books are written in general? I was so endeared to Aduni, and I really appreciated her hero's journey. I appreciated that the narrative set up like a hero's journey, and I definitely want to see more books that are the hero's journey of young girls. And in this case, the title lets us know she's finding her voice. And there is a lot of hardship in this book, but it's also pulled along by a strong sense of hope. And where sometimes that, like, there's some toxic positivity that can happen within trying to explain hardships and maybe alleviate guilt from the privileged. I didn't feel that about this book at all. It was hopeful, and I was hopeful the whole time as the reader, knowing that this hero was going to go on her journey, and it would end in a way that like a hero's journey, right? She would reach the end of her journey successfully. This book I have recommended to a friend and colleague of mine. I recommended that they try the audio, but I also said, because of how the English is written in the beginning, which is a bit of a pigeon, maybe I would describe it as, that it could be easier to follow along until you get the rhythm of how how it's written in the first more than half of the book. I listened to The Janissary Tree by Jason Goodwin, and I do like Istanbul as a setting. I do like these, now this is the third one I read, like detective sleuth novel. It's set in Istanbul, and I honestly think, this is, and I mean, there's a homage to Oman Pamuk, Orhan Pamuk, let me say, who is Turkey's, literary giant. So I think that's the front of mine, sort of sleuth one that I read, and one written by a Turkish author. This is written by someone who studied them well at, I think, Cambridge. Jason Goodwin was, I think he said he was at, Cambridge, and became just enthused with the Ottoman Empire. And you can tell, and I do appreciate the telling of this sort of Western person, because as someone who didn't grow up in Turkey or in any of the remnants of the Ottoman Empire, and didn't learn that much about it. Thank you, our education system. Until kind of recently, I liked how he sort of like almost History Channel explained parts of the Ottoman Empire, so that I could, get the setting the way that I like to be able to get the setting. So I appreciated that, although I can see that could be a source of criticism. And of course, always interested in who's telling stories about where and how, and is it done with respect and honor, or is it done with a kind of like romanticizing or fetishizing that often happened by Western authors of the Ottoman Empire. In any case, it was a detective mystery, and it had a lot of action, and I found myself kind of even really liking the action. It was a decent listen, especially, and I'm glad. I think he has a nonfiction, maybe History of the Ottoman Empire, that if I ever found I would read, but it's not something like this isn't, if there was a series by an investigator Yashim, I don't know if I would continue to read it, but I'm glad that I got to experience that one. A Nearly Normal Family by M.T. Edvardson, translated from the Swedish by Rachel Wilson Broyles. Maybe Broyles. It's like the first time this has ever happened to me. I got most of the way through this book, or half the way through this book. Well, I got into the female. So we start with this. This book is told from 3 points of view: the father, the daughter, and the mother. And I got into the daughter's point of view, and then I started to think, why does this story feel so familiar? And it turns out I did sort of half watch this, or maybe even watch this Netflix series in something like 2020. This book came out in 2019, so I get 2020 would probably align. I know it was like in the heart of the pandemic, and I was binge watching Netflix like for the first, last, and only time of my life. And so I couldn't tell you what happened with half the things I watched, but the story seemed really familiar. And then the things that I liked about it, for instance, I'm starting to understand the criminal justice system in Sweden. I liked that part of the story, even on the Netflix. And then I looked it up. I looked it up online, and in fact, yes, this has a Netflix adaptation, and I had seen it before, and it did kind of ruin the red herring twist, because there is one. This book reminded me kind of a contemporary Slewfoot. There's no fantasy elements, but there are the same sort of conspiratorial elements and the general theme of institutions that maybe even benefit, and certainly from the misuse of female bodies, but certainly continue to disenfranchise even in contemporary times, as this book does. That and in the same with Slewfoot, like the recourse of females who know that they can't use the institution. They have to find, whether it's alliance with dark forces as a metaphor or not, they have to find a way to get around the institution because the institution is not built for them. And in fact, it's built to keep them disenfranchised. And I thought that it was an interesting read to read so close to Slewfoot because they were so similar and very much different in those ways. So if you like crime drama and even like courtroom drama, like in the last point of view, which is The Mothers, there was a lot of courtroom scenes, and I started to fall out of this book a little bit because I'm not that interested in courtroom scenes. I know I used to watch some Law and Order whenever I stayed for conferences in hotel rooms. I'd be like, oh, Law and Order's always on, and I'll find one I can like. But I don't necessarily like to read courtroom scenes, and so that made me fall out a little bit. And I would also say that the first point of view, which is the father's, was the most convincing and compelling for me to read. When he started writing the daughter and the mother's point of view, part of it was because I realized, oh, I already know the twist of this book. Not that I'm not plot driven, but I think in this particular work, the plot is important. And so that might have made me fall out, but also I don't think that he did such a good job on the other two points of view. I'm glad that I read this. At the Friends of the Library right now, they have a The Book Was Better display. So I think that that's where this is going because it's definitely got an adaptation. And I think this it came out in 2019. So it's older now. Maybe it lost some of its height, but I definitely think like Grisham fans would like this book. So if you're a Grisham fan, you would like this book. Just a guess. I wouldn't consider myself a Grisham fan, but I have definitely read plenty of his books back in the day when they were hyped, and then I found some while traveling. They tend to make it around the world. Coming to me by recommendation was The Lesbiana's Guide to Catholic School by Sonora Reyes. And because I wanted a young adult, I try to work young adults into at least one per month. And I also wanted to read this book, and I don't expect that I'll be able to find it in my thrifting. I just got it from the library. Isn't that great? And I listened to it. I decided to listen to it. I thought that the narrator did an amazing job, and I really liked this book. I appreciate that the author in the beginning does a pretty good job of saying, here's the content warnings, and I want you to know up front, because if you're going through this and you're not ready to experience or explore it through the characters of this book, then take care of yourself, please. But I also think that we need these. This is the kind of book that I think is very effective at building empathy. And by that I mean, I don't think Sonora Reyes wrote for non-queer, non-Latina folk. I think she wrote for young Latinas that are coming of age and coming out, whatever that means for them, and coming into their identity. And this book was very much written for them. So if you're empathetic enough to read a book that's not written for you, but could help you learn and empathize what it might be like, this would be a great book. But it's not written for that, and I appreciated that about it. I appreciated that this book was written for the audience for whom it was written, and I think that it did a good job of that. We follow our main character, Yami, who moves with her brother from a public school in Arizona to a Catholic school. She's navigating fitting in school, making friends, Catholicism and what it means for her own identity as a queer girl who is not out yet. She's navigating how to come out to her family. And the risks and benefits of that. She's navigating how to come out at school. She's navigating the religion, and she's also just navigating her relationship with her brother and other family teenage stuff. And I like my teenage dramas. I thought this was fun and worth it, and definitely recommended to many, if not most, readers. What the River Knows by Isabella Beñez. This is a historical romantasy, and I read some reviews, because if I particularly don't like a book, and I have more negative things than nice things to say about this book, and I just won't use, this is already a 25-minute video, and I'm not going to use that much time to hate on a book. It's a popular book and people like it, and it has many a issue, and I'm not the only one that can see that. And so I looked up some reviews on Goodreads just to see what people really liked about it, to see, you know, did I miss something, but also, you know, because whenever I'm the one that is like, this is popular and I don't like it at all, let me see if somebody else doesn't. And one of my favorite reviews ever, maybe on Goodreads, it said, "The river ain't no shit." And yeah, that sums it up. What the river knows, the river ain't no shit. This book has its endearing qualities, and if you like Disney movies and you're aware that there's some harmful tropes in them, but you still think that there's more benefit than not, then this is the kind of this is the kind of book for, in my opinion, for the Disney movie fan. And there you have it. Yeah, I think I'll leave it at that. This book is for you if you like your Disney princesses and or movies. I think to take a breath of fresh air after that, or not, I read Boy Parts by Eliza Clark. I had originally planned to read this with Slewfoot, because I had predicted that Slewfoot had some gays, and I know that Eliza Clark in this book really interrogates and meditates around gays. I didn't feel like I needed it after Slewfoot. I thought that the cozy that I listened to, which was the Demon Hunters, the Village Library Demon Hunters Society, sort of did what I needed like a partner read to do. So I kind of put this off, and then decided that after What the River Knows, that maybe some transgressive, in your face female lit was what I needed. And yeah, Eliza Clark is this book is incredibly transgressive work, and it's incredibly confronting, and I feel like almost too confronting. So I would say to anyone, like, I know that a lot of folks promote this as weird girl lit. Yeah, I mean, I guess it depends on how you define weird girl lit. And also how much insulation. I mean, I understand people have to read, the reader has to read in the state of mind that they're in. This is incredibly confronting. It's an incredibly confronting book, and where, yeah. So content warnings, please read if you don't want to be ready to be really confronted with multiple angles and talking about sexual assault and violence in lots of different ways. Also, yeah, I think that's what I will say. And I really deeply appreciate everything that Eliza Clark did in this book. One day, I might even plan to reread this book, I think in a different state of mind or with a different set of books around it. I would interact differently with this book. This book was so confronting sometimes. Yeah, I mean, sometimes my mind was just like, I want to think about this, but not now. In fact, I'm not going to think about it now. And I think that impacted some of the ways that I like the allegory, or the symbolism, and the mechanisms that Eliza Clark is doing somewhat expertly. I believe this is her debut. I just wasn't able to fully appreciate, but I can say they're there. And I'm super glad that I read the book, that I gave it a try. I have folks to recommend it to, but as the statistics say, most of the people who I would recommend it to, I would have to do under huge advisory for the content, the essay content warning, because most females I know have experienced it in some way. So there's that. But I got this book. Okay, so I really wanted to read this book, and I found it used at one of the local independent bookstores. And so I traded in some books, got some credit, and got it. And how that bookstore works is you get credit, but you can only get 50% off, which works. Then it puts the book price down to what I normally pay for books. So I'm going to take this back to the very same bookstore and trade it in and get, the credits needed for another book that I've just been looking forward to read, that I know that I want to read. And maybe even another Eliza Clark, that I haven't found, say, in Little Free Libraries or Friends of the Library bookstores or thrift stores, like the scavenge that I have been doing. Okay, the very last book I'm going to talk about is A Brightness Long Ago by Guy Gavriel Kay, and I liked his writing style. Let me tell you, I'm not a epic fantasy girly. Like, I read the book, I used the features like the map and the character sometimes. I was in it mostly while reading it, but I set it down and then I just didn't even think about it again. So the next time I picked it up, I was like, what the hell is going on in this world? And I couldn't make myself really care. I cared about his craft, and I find him quite crafty, but I just couldn't care. I just couldn't care. And that has to do with it being both epic and historical fantasy. And I want to continue to experiment, and not be really, really, really sort of derisive in my reading, because that's part of, that's part of diversity, is to just try things that even maybe you're not fully into, but try to see what it has to offer. What I can say is I don't need another story of patriarchal violence, whether it's historical fantasy or thinly veiled close to the history. Like, if I'm going to read fantasy, I want to imagine a world that's not misogynistic. Or if it is, I want to interrogate it in ways like this, perhaps, or even like Layla Lami's Dream World. So where this is well done, I don't like and I compared it in my short to Game of Thrones. I don't like these little like Games of Thrones and patriarchal violence, historical, and the roles of females in this book. Like, it's not new, exciting, or adventurous to me. So I think that was part of the reason, like, if I'm going to work as hard for a book that's set up in this way, then I want to go to a place where I haven't been before. And this clearly wasn't going to take me there at all. I mean, I appreciated his acknowledgments and like how he gave me references. By that I mean that the author, of like what city states in Italy he was like sort of thinly comparing, making this little somewhat fantastical world to. I liked a little bit his work with memory as the last reading period. I'd read a lot of sort of philosophical, existential, and books that dealt with memory, and some of that was really carrying over. And I almost wish that I would have read this book kind of with that series, because I think I would have cued into more of those pieces of this book. But I mean, I don't regret reading it, but this was not for me. And I think what I said in my short, and I still mean, like, I can see how this would have its even almost fan its fans. So I hope that when I put this back into a little free library, one of those fans can find it and really enjoy the craft and prose of Guy Gabriel Kay. And now I'm okay. Like I've had enough fantasy. I've had enough fantasy after my end of December that I won't pick it up again for a while. Yeah. And I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that. I got a lot of other things to read. So I'm okay with that. I will just, like, every once in a while be like, you know what, let me try a fantasy again. But like romance, it's not my genre. And that's okay. There's something out there for everyone. So